We've been working on this for over a year, so it was kind of a slow build. There wasn't a lot of interim material to present, so finally we're here with the bulk of it at the end. So East West Gateway is the MPO in the St. Louis region, and we've been working with our partners in MoDOT St. Louis District to kind of provide some supplemental guidance to their EPG and how they handle arterial roadways in the region. And so, come here. All right. So I guess the main reason why we bother with this, the current design guidance really comes from rural highway design standards and really doesn't account well for a lot of the complexity of context and the needs of urbanized areas. And so when MoDOT has had issues kind of going around those to address local needs, it gets messy politically, financially. The community engagement is sometimes things get contentious. And so this is really a tool for practitioners. That's the initial idea was for MoDOT staff in the region, but then we very quickly decided that it should be a tool freely available to all the counties and municipalities in the region. And so that engagement with them basically was a series of workshops. And it was, again, not just MoDOT staff, but other regional roadway planners and engineers, basically getting more specific as we move through the process, and then touching base with MoDOT leadership as we went through. Actually, let me back up on the MoDOT leadership. Both the St. Louis region MoDOT leadership, but then also we touch base with central office in Jeff City. Jeff City they allowed St. Louis region to do this, and it's somewhat a pilot test. It's not intended to be a statewide guidance tool. In fact, we're not even really calling it guidance. It's a supplement to their existing guidance. And I think whether or not this stays in place or becomes a bit more has utility across other regions of the state, that really kind of depends on how this works. So the intent on this whole thing was to really, again, broaden the context considerations when they work in these arterial segments in the region, and all modes and users, but also land use and place. And then that engagement component that I touched on before, different projects, really, you don't need a full-blown engagement if you're doing a simple project or a basic maintenance project. But as you get more involved, you really need to touch base and work with your community. And then providing a consistent process to provide that design flexibility for places. So it's not intended to make all roadways the same, put bike lanes everywhere. This isn't even required. This is optional for the time being, at least. So one of the first things we got into, since this is really for the practitioners, we decided to focus on the existing MoDOT process and how to plug into that. A lot of the counties and even, well, mostly the counties, they really defer to the MoDOT process just because it's simple. It's an industry standard type in the state. So instead of kind of creating our own separate thing, really we focused on plugging into that process. Those people already know this, and I think it'll just have the cleanest utility if we do it. So this diagram is just kind of a quick outline of the 10 steps that they have for roadway design and planning and construction, moving through it. We're not dealing with the back end. We're really only focused on those first 6 steps that you see here. And one of the main things that there were 2 things that we really noticed as we got into this. One, these really aren't discrete sequential steps. And there isn't actually a lot of clarity in the guidance, their existing guidance, the EPG, on how these are done. There's a lot of gray area. And the other thing that we noticed is that by the time a project is kind of fully scoped, particularly the ones that have, other safety issues, bike ped, transit, freight, a lot of other of these kind of urban complex issues in constrained spaces. That front end definition isn't really complete. And so you'd wind up with projects that were scoped and even budgeted before a lot of those other needs were even identified. And that just led to a very difficult reality when it came to trying to deal with additional concerns in a scope. How to even allow a project to work with multimodalism. Well, there's no money, so maybe next time. And so our process really, I don't expect you to read all of these, but this is really adding some clarity and simplicity, I guess, to these 6 steps, and also how to more broadly, how to bring in these other concerns and constituents when you're working in a community. So if you're going to do things differently, there might be tools that come into play that you're not used to using, that you maybe need to do things a little differently. And so the consultant we worked with were great. They really took a very clean way of breaking down the buckets of tools that you have for working within a roadway, inside the curb, intersections, crossings, and then outside the curb. And the tools that are highlighted in that table on the right are ones that we spent a bit more time with in the document, because they're ones that might be a little less known or a little less described in the EPG. And here are a couple of examples: narrowing lanes, floating transit islands, mobility hubs. And these are the sort of the cut sheets. Each one of those tools that's highlighted has its own cut sheet, kind of explaining what it is, guidance for using, what other tools might work well with it, and some of the benefits that you may expect. Obviously, these are not meant to be, the final word and guidance on how to use these things, but it's a good starting point. Come here. So once we've kind of got a sense of how to define projects and what's the variety of tools are in place, we get into working with a series of typologies. Now, there already is a set of typologies that they should be familiar with. It's buried in AASHTO. Most roadway designers are maybe a little familiar with it, but these are broad categories. They focus entirely on the form of a place, urban core all the way through rural, and then a few stops in between. It's density, land use, building setbacks. That's really pretty much it. So these are the types of places that roadways go through. We didn't really see that as entirely practical, because you're not talking about the function of the roadway. So laying out a series of steps to kind of identify a typology for a roadway. That step 1 is really the tool they already had, that AASHTO, that previous slide that we talked about. Step 2 is really about local goals and plans for a roadway segment that may already be in place. Step 3 is really the function of the roadway, who all is using this roadway. And then step 4 is really kind of that typology identification. So if we're going to add functional category to this, again, I don't expect you to read all of this, but you can begin to get a sense of what we're after here. Everything from, say, a downtown Main Street to industrial business corridor, residential streets, and the rest. So you kind of, the spectrum is more commercial to more special, I guess, and residential to more industrial business. So when you combine those, and this looks like it is a very rudimentary, simple approach. It took a lot of work to simplify things, as you may imagine if you've been through something like this, but those form-based typologies that they're already familiar with across the top, and then those functional typologies, which we're adding, are kind of that column on the left. The blue dots are the blue boxes. The text within those STL is St. Louis City, St. Charles County is SCC. Those we have 4 counties plus the city of St. Louis. So these are the places in the region where you're likely to find these types of roadway segments. And I guess the punchline there is now when the roadway planners and engineers are looking to resurface an arterial, in this case, Manchester Road from Big Bend to Van Deventer, it spans both part of the city and part of the county in St. Louis. It's not just a mill and resurface project for a roadway. It really begins to break down. There are multiple place types along here with multiple needs, different needs. And so different tools will have to come into play and really just sort of outline a process and a script to move forward and some of the tools that might come into play for the different place types. And so these typologies, that chart with the blue boxes 2 slides ago, we wound up with 40 something typologies. This is mixed use street, urban core. And so there's a cut sheet for each typology. This is the last chapter of the document. Description of what it is, context characteristics, development density, land use, building setbacks, that little list there. Typical modal priority is really a kind of a baseline to be checked as you go through. These are default settings, but each roadway may have its own characteristics. Some of that might adjust, but these would be kind of standards. High pedestrian priority, vehicular priority. Yeah, it's there, but it's a little less. You've got things really need to slow down in order to make it safer for pedestrians. Freight is there also, but it really needs to accommodate everything else. Other design considerations, right of way. These are some again, typical parameters that you might expect. And this is really to kind of help the engineering crowd who is used to and has been trained to look at things in a very specific way, help them translate what they typically see to these typologies, which is more of a planner approach. And then the applicable tools column on the right, yes, maybe, no, for the various features you may or may not consider if you're a planner or designer working on these roadways. This is just another example, transit corridor, suburban. You see the diagram down there. And this one, particularly for this crowd, you might notice that on opposite sides of the street, we have 2 different treatments for the bicycle facility. This is not to suggest we would ever recommend two different treatments on the same roadway, but just to say, there are multiple ways to accommodate this in this roadway, and it's a discussion you need to have as you move through the process. And then just quick guidance on how to use these tools. So the document itself will be available freely on our website next week. I'm not exactly sure the day. We're kind of wrapping up some details. But if you go to East West Gateway, ewgateway.org, and hover over the transportation pull down, you'll be able to get to it's called Blueprint for Arterials document, and that's where this will be. But there's a bit more than just the document. There's a training curriculum that was also developed. And this is for the staff that will be using the document. This is just so that it can kind of propagate or perpetuate after the consultant contract is done, which is now they're done. And it also includes a module for people who will actually facilitate the training, particularly the in-person workshops. So, and I put this slide up there because Arterial study that we just completed, we didn't do this in isolation. We received a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. And that document is also now done, due for adoption by our board, hopefully, this coming Wednesday. And, you know, a lot of the high injury network locations are on the arterials, not all of them, but I would say, you know, there's a lot of overlap. So I would say that that document does a great job of identifying where we really need to focus our priority investments. And I think this document, the blueprints for Arterials document, can go a long way in kind of guiding how that gets done. So the SS4A document has some of that, quite a bit of it in there as well. But I think these two documents can really work in tandem. Anyway, at this point, any questions you might have, I'd be glad to try to address them.
Hey, Paul, thanks for presenting that today. I think you pointed out some things that relate to, I know this group was aware that there isn't a lot in relation to complete streets on MoDOT TPG. So is your thought that this will get there, or that you can try to add this to DPG to give them a little more resource across the state, not just St. Louis?
Right. Well, so the reality is that St. Louis district MoDOT was very hungry for this, and they'd been pushing it. And it just kind of took a while for central office to get comfortable, I think, with how we were scoping it. There was a lot of refinement of scope over time, what the document was going to be and isn't. So we had to land on, for the time being at least, it being optional, and for the St. Louis district. So I would like to think that if it works well on the first few projects, it really demonstrates its utility and benefit, and then it gets, I think they're thinking the same thing. I think they're just being very cautious. You know, I fully appreciate MoDOT's reluctance to have an external agency like us involved in updating their engineering guidance. I'm not an engineer. So our consultants were MoDOT staff that we worked with on this are, but I understand their conservative approach on this. So the short answer to that is maybe. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a question kind of, so you mentioned some of the training guidance that is kind of coming with this. Do you anticipate that's going to be mainly like, you know, folks in St. Louis County in the Department of Transportation? That I know a lot of those folks were involved in the process. So I guess who are you anticipating, you know, will need some additional training on this?
So I think any MoDOT staff, certainly. We developed this, we did workshops, we did pilot test of the training workshops and everything with MoDOT and outside staff. But I think anybody that wants to use the thing really needs to just kind of go through the training. At this point, I believe it's a series of 4 videos and 2 workshops. Really just kind of introduce and walk you through using the document. But you know, that it will be posted by MoDOT St. Louis District on, I think through one of their YouTube channels. And then we will have the document. We're not going to host the training. Technically, we're not even plugged in enough to really understand when the training may need updating, because we don't follow their processes as well as they do. So, but they will host the training. We will both host the document. But yeah, it'll be there for, I think the counties definitely will want to use it. It was funny when we were meeting with one county in particular. I probably shouldn't say who, but they were like, can you please make this mandatory? you know, because they get so much pushback from a minority of state council or a couple of vociferous, you know, residents or whoever. The squeaky wheels can really get in the way of them trying to do what they think is the best thing sometimes. It won't be mandatory, at least for the immediate future. So, yeah.
Well, this is a really terrific resource, and thanks for coming to share today about it.